You're listening to Big World Network.
Skyfire, Episode 10, written and read by Arthur W. Johnson. A lump had formed within his throat, for there stood destiny off the bow. Their port of call lay just ahead. He humbly made a mental bow. So that's New York. What an exciting town it is, just like you said it would be, Seamus said to Kyle as he stared in wonder at the skyline along the harbor. He couldn't believe all the 4- and 5-story buildings he saw. The wharf along the East River was lined with ships of every size and shape, loading and unloading cargo. They stood at the bow, ready to heave the hawser to the man on the dock standing next to the bollard. New York is awfully noisy, too, Seamus added. You haven't seen or heard anything yet, Kyle said. I was here for 2 weeks on my last trip, and the things I saw would amaze you. Just then Captain Fowler gave the order, and they heaved the heavy rope to the man below, who caught it deftly and ran it around the bollard one time. He proceeded to pull on the rope with the aid of another man who had come up, and the bow tucked smoothly into the dock. The men made the hawser taut and without fanfare returned to their previous task. Seamus had watched the entire process in awe of their ability. They made that look simple, he said to Kyle. They do it all the time, Kyle said matter-of-factly. It should be simple for them. They joined the rest of the crew loading the barrels laden with Irish whiskey into the nets laid out on the deck. Seamus watched as they attached the hook to the 4 corners of the net and hoisted the load aloft before swinging it over the side to be lowered to the dock below. He traced the line up to the jib and back down to the boom of the pivoting base of the crane that contained the twin tread wheels. Fascinating, he said to Kyle. What's fascinating? The way they use that. He didn't know what the word, so he simply pointed. That is called a crane, Kyle said, and it's used to lift loads off and on ships. I can see that, Seamus replied. It's certainly a lot easier than lugging each barrel like we did at the beginning of the voyage. This is a modern seaport, Kyle said. He raised his arm and pointed at the row of 5-story buildings across from them that ran up Fulton Street and added, and those are the counting houses and the warehouses that are making this place so busy. It's sort of like a world trading center, if you know what I mean. Come on, let's get our gear and go ashore. Seamus stopped by Captain Fowler on his way to the hatch. He held out his hand and he said, It was a pleasure sailing under you, Captain. You're welcome to stay on, young man, Captain Fowler said. No, thank you, Captain, Seamus said as he nodded at the building across the street. My future lies there. Who really knows where their future lies, the captain asked. I know where I want to be, but that's not the same as knowing where I will be. He still held Seamus's hand and gripped it firmer yet. I have great hopes for you, lad, and I wish you the best of luck wherever you fetch up. Thank you, Captain, Seamus said, and I wish the best to you as well. He reclaimed his hand, stepped over the hatch surround, set his insoles on either side of the ladder, and slid to the deck below. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet as though he had been doing it all his life. Kyle looked up and asked, Where were you? I was saying goodbye to Captain Fowler, since I'll never see him again. Kyle stopped what he was doing and he looked over his shoulder at Seamus. How can you know that? I don't, but I doubt that I'll ever sail from here again, he said as he looked back at his friend. This will be my home now. He wondered where that decision had come from, since he had not consciously made it before that moment. Sitting next to his half-packed belongings, he looked at his friend, repeating the words with a glazed look in his eyes. Kyle stood up straight and turned to face Seamus. Does that mean we'll not be taking any more voyages together? I don't know, Kyle, he said, but I'll not be going back to Ireland, I don't think. Pity, Kyle said. I rather like your company, and you're a good teacher. I can read now, and that makes me feel powerful, my friend. I would like to share that power with you. Seamus wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he simply stood and returned to his packing. He climbed the ladder with one hand, and once through the hatch, slung his pack onto the deck with the other. He knelt and reached down for Kyle's pack to make the climb easier for his friend. Kyle came up through the hatch, and they turned toward the gangplank together for the last time. They were in the new world. Seamus felt exhilarated, and Kyle showed all the signs of excitement a young man can at facing another adventure. They crossed the busy wharf, which also served as South Street, and went into number 2 Fulton Street, the first in the line of buildings known as the Schermerhorn Row. The clerk sitting at the desk just inside the door looked up as they entered. "Can I help you?" Kyle squinted at the young man. "You're new since I was here last." "I am that," he said. "A man's got to work somewhere." "True," Kyle said. "We just came in on that ship." "The snow?" the young man asked, looking through the open door. "You know your ships," Kyle said. "Anyway, my friend thinks he wants to stay here and he's looking for work." "Work we always have," the man said. He held out his hand to Seamus. "I'm Heinrich. Peter Schermerhorn is a distant cousin. He gave me work when I finished school. I hire men who can give me a full day of hard work without complaining." Seamus took his hand in a strong grip. "I can give you that." "Then you're hired. Do you need a place to stay?" I don't know my way around yet. Where are there lodgings?" "I can put you up on the 6th floor. I only saw 5 floors from the ship." "There's the attic. We plan to put in some dormer windows someday, but for now it's a place to stay. You'll have to feed yourself, though." He looked at Kyle. "Are you looking for work, too?" "Only while we're docked," he said, glancing at Seamus. "I'm sailing back and forth as long as the captain will have me." "Or until you get washed overboard," Seamus said with a snort of fun at his friend's expense. "Yes, there is that," Kyle said with a smile. "Done," Heinrich said. "Follow me." They seemed to climb forever. On the 5th floor, Heinrich stopped and took a lantern down from the hook next to the door. Yet another set of steep stairs. At the top was a hook like the one below with its own lantern, which Heinrich lit. "You can sleep here," he said, indicating 4 cots, 2 on either side of the room. "Is anyone else living here?" Seamus asked. "Not at the moment," Heinrich answered as he glared at the graffiti on the walls. "Take a couple of days to get settled in and see the sights. Tomorrow's Sunday, so we don't work. Monday we start with the sunrise. I'll see you downstairs then." He turned and made his way down the stairs. As his head disappeared below the floor level, Seamus turned to Kyle, and they smiled at each other. "I didn't hope to find work so easily," Seamus said. "Thank you for stopping in here and getting that started." "I knew there was work here, even if it was temporary." He reached over Seamus' shoulder and turned him gently toward the stairs. "Let us go find some food. I'm starving." "Wait a moment," Seamus said as he peered at the same graffiti that had apparently bothered Heinrich. "Bring the lantern closer, Kyle." Kyle took the lantern down from the hook and held it close. What they saw was a pretty good likeness of the ship they had just disembarked, drawn on the wall with the words Irish Lassie below, along with the name Mickey O'Rourke in the year 1829. "That's our ship," Kyle said. "And wasn't Mick the lad who was resting on the bilge pump lever while his friend Norris removed the rat plugging the pipe?" "Aye, he was. I wonder if he was the same Mick who made this artwork," Seamus said as he indicated the drawing on the wall. It was suddenly artwork rather than graffiti, since they knew both the subject and the artist. They made their way down the stairs and out along Fulton Street. They finally came to Broadway, turned right, and found a place for a meal a little way along. After they were satisfied, they traveled westward until they came to a west side and the waterfront along Hudson River. Seamus' mouth formed an O as he looked up and down the riverfront at the forest of tall ship masts. Kyle saw the look on his friend's face and he laughed. "I said you would be amazed." Seamus looked back at Kyle. "I thought we had docked on a busy wharf, but this is loaded with ships. I didn't know there were so many ships in the entire world. Where do they come from?" "All over the world," Kyle said with a wave that indicated everywhere. "If you name any place on this earth, there's probably a ship from that port at these docks." Seamus squinted up and down the river again, shading his eyes with his hands against the reflection of the lowering sun on the watery expanse. He shook his head and said, "Amazing. We've got a couple more hours of daylight at best. Come on, I'll show you some more sights that will amaze you." They turned and wended their way back among the tall buildings making up that part of New York City. They came out of the shadows cast by the buildings into a grassy area with trees off to one side. There was a group of young men running back and forth across the grass as they approached. They held poles with little baskets on one end. Now and then one would swing his pole and the white object would fly out. Another man would catch the object in his pole's basket and start running in a different direction. "What are they doing?" Seamus asked as they watched. "It's a game. They told me last time I was here that the Indians have played it for a long time. It looks dangerous. Look how that fellow hit the other one with his stick. From what I've learned, that is mile. The Indians call the game Little Brother of War." "I don't doubt that at all." Apparently the Indians often had goals that were miles apart and the games would go on for days. "What's the point of the game?" Kyle pointed at the opposite ends of the grassy area and asked, "Do you see those 2 fellows?" When Seamus nodded, he continued, "They have to keep the ball from going into their net. If it goes in, it's a point for the other team. The team that scores the most points is the winner of the game." "And you say this goes on for days?" Seamus asked. Kyle laughed. Not anymore. One of the fellows who knew a lot about the game told me that it did in the old days before the white man took up the game. Now they have a man with a watch keeping the time. Oh, so there's a set length to the game then, Seamus said in understanding. What did you say it was called? The Indians called it Bagataway or Tiwarathon, depending on what language they speak. The French call it lacrosse because the stick looks like a bishop's crozier or a shepherd's crook. No matter what the name, it is fast-moving. I'll say it is, Seamus said as the teams raced by very close to them. He was forced to duck as a pole inadvertently whipped past his head, but not before he got a good look at the stick. I see what you mean about the stick looking like a shepherd's crook or a bishop's crozier. He studied the webbing in the basket as the player continued away from him and down the field. It looks like it would be fun to play. They're pretty tight with their membership, Kyle said. I doubt that you'd be able to get on a team. They watched for a while before they turned around and headed south to number 2 Fulton Street. The light was fading in the western sky as they reached the corner, but not before turning the clouds, the most beautiful mixture of reds interlaced with orange and yellow. Lavender streaked the sky above all the other colors. Seamus stopped at the door and returned to the corner for a full view of the western sky. He stood mesmerized and gaped at the Skyfire that welcomed him to the new land. He was sure he would never leave these shores again. "This is home," he whispered. A single tear brought on by all the conflicting emotions within him moistened his eye.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.